Welcome to Thorn, everybody. It's going to be a historic afternoon, particularly for me, because I always learn a lot when I'm with Robert and all you guys. So I'm looking forward to this. There's been something here for a very long period of time, and it was probably built originally, and we'll go into this in more depth, as a sentinel building, guarding the river. Because the trees were not here many, many years ago, and you can see from the house right to that end of the river and to the other far end. So it's strategically placed, and I think that's the reason that Thorn is here, and hopefully why we're all here. We'll find out. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, John, for having us here this afternoon. This house has been here since 1802, or where about then, and it's been in several ownerships, so it's been altered and changed a number of times. We have these old cellars which are a bit of a mystery underneath it, because there was nothing here on the map in the 1700s, or nothing shown on the maps. It was just woodland and what have you. But what we believe really is that it's linked with Wembury House, because the drive is the drive up to Wembury House. So we think possibly the gatehouse was here. Wembury House in the time of the fire hearths had 32 fire hearths, whereas the normal people in Wembury had 1 or 2. So it was a really big house, and the gatehouse, which we believe possibly was here, had 13, so that was also a big house. So it would warrant the cellars that are still there. So anyway, as you all know, the River Yarn runs up here, and the deep water where it touches is where the quay is below here, which would have been the quay for Wembury House. And everything in those days would have come by the river, because the roads weren't that good, so that was the easiest way for the gentry to travel around. And you find on estuaries there's all these big houses are always not far from the estuary. So just up here we have Kitley on the left, and then we have Pusnich on the right. So all where the big families would have lived. And so in 1802 the Lockyer family came and bought the manor of Wembury, and sadly he was to die in 1806 when he fell out of his carriage coming home from Plymouth, and he got gangrene in his leg. The story is there was a cow resting under the hedge in Plymstock, and the cow jumped up, frightened the horse, and poor Mr. Lockyer was thrown out. And he lay there for a while, and his servant from here, from Wembury House, went to look for him, and they found him and took him to Who Manor, I think, probably, because that was where he went. I can't think of the name of the guy that he went with now. It's called Bulteel.
Or Harris.
Yeah, Bulteel. I think he went. Mr. Bulteel looked after him, and sadly he died. So then the Wembury House was barely finished, and they were probably in debt or what have you. So the next generation, Thomas Lockyer Jr., settled down here. This was known as Lockyer's Cottage, and he built the first house here, what you see now. So they were here for about 60 years, I guess. He had a very interesting history. He was sent to France when he was a lad, because that was what they did in those days. The merchants of Plymouth and places, they would send their eldest son across to learn the language and meet people, and vice versa. So there was a French lad over here with the Lockyer family. They were involved in sail making and shipping in Plymouth, and their main place was the Island House on the Barbican. That was the Lockyers. And the brother, Thomas Lockyer Senior's brother, was Edmund Lockyer, and he was a very big wig in Plymouth, and he was Lord Mayor several times. Well, Mayor, wasn't Lord Mayor in those days, was it? The Lockyer family were, in fact, mayors of Plymouth on 9 occasions, different members of the family. So we have Lockyer Hospital, Lockyer Street, must be more Lockyers, I can't think of them from it. Lockyer's Quay, yeah, that's right, yeah, that's true. Yeah, so so they were quite well connected, and so the widow Lockyer lived in Wembury House until 1925, until she died. And lots of the family would come and stay and what have you, including the famous Edmund, who raised the flag for Britain in Western Australia, in Albany, and claimed it for the Crown. That's his claim to fame, and that's why our church is connected with Australia, has the Australian flags flying, etc. So many years ago we had a Lockyer festival and we got all these things together, and the man came down from the Australian embassy, I think. It was big doings, wasn't it? Big doings at the time. So I've digressed. So Mr. Lockyer, who lived here, the second Mr. Lockyer, he had been to France and he got caught in France because Napoleon came back and it was all chaos, and the people he was staying with were scared to keep him. So he went off, and he was only a lad, and he became a drummer boy in the French Foreign Legion. And he went down through France and eventually got to Bordeaux, and he could hear English speaking at Bordeaux, and it was American ships because the Americans were, in league with the French. So anyway, he managed to get on board and speak to the captain, and the captain knew of the Lockyer family and managed to meet a ship on the way to Plymouth, and he swapped over ships and came home. But it had a lasting effect on him, and they said when he was annoyed or agitated, he would sit on the veranda here and beat his drum. That was one of the tales. Anyway, he married an interesting lady. He married Anne Rivers from Ivybridge. The Rivers family owned Stowford, and they also owned the London Hotel. And the story goes that when she was a baby, well, before she was a baby, her mother arrived at the hotel one night, a lady, fine lady, with her servant maid, and went upstairs and delivered a baby girl, and then disappeared in the morning, leaving a bag of gold behind. So, very mysterious beginnings. Anyway, this baby was adopted by the Rivers family, Jane Rivers, and she married Mr. Lockyer. And she was supposed to be a very attractive, pretty girl, but they went to London on their honeymoon, and she was given a rose by some chap in Trafalgar Square or somewhere. Anyway, she's supposed to have caught smallpox, and she came back and she had a very hard time, and her face became all pockmarked, and she lost most of her hair. So anyway, she stayed on here and lived to be an elderly life. But her husband, he also had another lady in Plymouth who called herself Mrs. Lockyer. And so there was two families. There was the family here, the Wheel family, and the others in Plymouth who they were always afraid they were going to bump into. So that's moving on, what happens after next. Oh, well, Mr. Lockyer, he had several children here, and his eldest son and another one he totally disinherited. The eldest son went to university, and he signed a guarantor for one of his friends for money, and all went wrong, pear-shaped, and his father was appalled, and he disinherited him, and the poor lad had to go off and find his own way. And another son, he was a bit strange. He went to Scotland, and he was engaged to a lady, and she broke it off, and he sued her for breach of promise. And that all went on for quite some time. Anyway, eventually he did marry his landlady's daughter in Scotland, and that little branch of the family did survive and came back. But so then there was the son who was sensible. He became a solicitor in Plymouth, and he got married, and his wife was in charge of the Prince of Wales or some such royalty was coming. And being the Lord Mayor's wife, she had to do all sorts of things, and she was very heavy having a child. And she got in a, tis was, I guess, and she had the baby, and she died. So that was quite sad, but the baby survived. They didn't think she was going to. They buried, when they dug up, they had to move her grave. It was outside St Andrew's Church. And they had to move her grave, and when they dug it up, they found that she was buried with a baby's coffin beside her, but there was no baby in it, because the baby managed to survive. So that was the tale. I know all these tales because the lady who was that baby wrote a lot of letters, and I've read a lot of her letters, and she regales all these stories. Another story was that when Thomas Lockyer Jr. was here, and it was in Napoleonic times, Napoleon came back and the royal family had to go and run away, and the Duke of Orleans was staying at Kitley, and he used to come down the river to see Mr. Lockyer, because of course they could speak French together. So that was another tale. So moving on from the Lockyer family, they were here. The last one was James Laws Lockyer. He didn't marry, but he was the last one living here, and he's buried in the churchyard down at Wembury. And he got very upset when Mr. Barwell wanted to block the old gateway at Wembury House at the top of where Passage Lane meets Brownsell Lane. And he built a wall across and blocked off the entrance, and Mr. Lockyer said it was his ground, that it was the gateway. He said it was his ground, and he wasn't allowed to build a wall across. And Mr. Lockyer was seen at moonlight knocking the wall down. But anyway, that was another court case that went on forever, and hence Mr. Barwell put a plaque up inside Monkswood to the iniquities of solicitors. So let me think, any more tales? Well, after the Lockyers went from here, there was a guy called Peter Frederick Blewett, and he was landed gentry from something Regis, I can't think of the name, Holcombe Regis. Holcombe Regis, that was where he lived. Anyway, he came here with his, he left his family, his wife and family, and ran off with his servant girl. And he came to live here. Well, then that servant girl left, and then he had a new servant girl, and she was Miss Kinkham from Nosmayor. And they were here for quite a while and had 4 or 5 children. They all seemed to live here quite happily together. So that was a while. That was the Blewetts were here. Then after the Blewetts, I think it was taken over by Lord Baring of Revelstoke for a while, and he had part of Wembury Manor. And then so he built the fish store down on further round, once you come in the Yelm. There's 2 cottages built right with the quay, and that was a fish store that was built by Lord Revelstoke. And then he went bust, and then everything was sold. Yeah, Blewett. Then there was a guy called Lieutenant Colonel John Sterling was here, and I don't know if he owned it or if he just rented it from Edward Baring. This is about 1880. And then after, there was later Fenton Armitage was here. And I think it was people that wanted to be members of Parliament, and they needed to live in the area or something, so they would come and rent the place for a year or two, something like that. Anyway, in about 1897, Mrs. Corey had to move out of Langdon Court because she was the second wife of the old Mr. Corey, and his old Mr. Corey died, and his son took over Langdon Court, so Mrs. Corey had to move out, and she came here to live, and she married the royal bodyguard, who was always in the pictures because she was very friendly with royalty and exceedingly friendly with the Duke of Edinburgh, Edward VII's brother. He was Admiral of the Fleet, so he was down in Plymouth quite a lot, and he visited Mrs. Corey quite a lot. She had 2 daughters, which were believed to be his, and they were, I've met the descendants, so they know all about it. They're quite happy with it. She came here, and of course she altered everything, and she built out here. She built a billiard room and a ballroom, because these two daughters were debutantes and they were brought out in London, and they had to find decent husbands, because it was just the period when they were, early 20s. So anyway, they both married lieutenants in the army or what have you, and had good jobs. And one of them was made governor of Windsor Castle, and the other one was made governor of Castle in Northern Ireland. I think it was Stormont or somewhere like that. So they were given, nice jobs. And Mrs. Corey married Colonel George Gore. He was the royal bodyguard. And they left here and they went to live at Exmouth Way somewhere, Starcross, I think. Yeah, Starcross, where they passed away. So after them, there was a guy called Charles Edward Curtis. I don't know anything about him for you. Then came William Arkwright. Now, William Arkwright, he was descended from the Spinning Jenny's Arkwright chappie that we all learned at school, or we did when I was at school. They probably don't know. He, as a young man, he was very athletic, and he used to go hunting a lot and jumping with his horses and what have you. And he had a very serious accident and he nearly died, and they had to do an operation on his head, brain operation. So he was never quite right after that. Well, we know he could have been, but anyway. He married a very well-known opera singer in London, but it was very short-lived. They didn't live together very long. And he came here, and he was very, very keen on Jersey cows and pointer dogs. And he wrote books about them, and he kept them, and he used to go judging them. And Thorn Cottage up the top that's where he kept the dogs. And I believe down in here, below here, was the shipping and cow house for his Jersey cows. He also became a Buddhist, is that right? Yeah, he became a Buddhist.
Garden ornaments.
Oh, is it? Yeah. He became a Buddhist, and somebody said he had a pagoda thing on the top of the house, but I'm not sure about that one. Have you ever heard of that one, John?
Yeah. A lot of the house was knocked down, and the pagoda was on top of a large library, right to through. I can answer.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's true. And he also was very keen on the gardens, and he brought visited, India and all sorts of funny places, and brought back specimens, and he started the gardens here. And his family came from Sutton Scarsdale, which some of you might know, in Derbyshire. And when he came, he brought his enormous urns with him. So as you walk along the gardens, you'll see these urns out there. So that belonged to Mr. Arkwright. So he was followed by there's another tale I could tell you, but I won't do that one. He was followed by the Honourable Mrs. Ida Marie Sebag Montefiore. Some of you ladies read novels by Sebag Montefiore. It's one of the family as a writer. She was a widow with two sons, and one of her sons was a little bit delicate, and I think she thought living here would be good for his health. She was the daughter of Lord Bearsted, who was the founder of the Shell Oil Company. So money wasn't an issue. And one of the tales is probably not true. They said Lord Bearsted was sitting here in the gardens, and somebody came up from the river with a shell, and that was how Shell Oil began. But I don't know if that's right, because his family they were importers of shells. That was their business before they went into the oil business, so it was probably not that at all. Anyway, she was here until 1935, from about 1925 to 35. And when she moved out, she gave the cliff land from all around the cliffs towards Wembury Beach for protection, for conservation. So that was how the National Trust started in Wembury, really. Following her was Dr. Gerald Stanley. He was here from 1939 to 1956, and he had been a doctor in Paris, and he married to a French lady, I think, and he had 3 daughters that were all born in Paris. And he came here, so that was sort of my father's era. My father came down here once to see them, and he was very taken by a French lady called Jacqueline, who was staying here. And that is why my sister is called Jacqueline. Yeah, that's the story. He was followed by somebody called Mr. Simmons, who I think bought it for like development purposes. And there was big servants' quarters at the back, which were all knocked down. And my uncle wanted to buy it. It was up for sale for £5,000. And my uncle wanted to buy it, and he wanted my father to put some money into it. My father wouldn't do it, because my uncle was a builder. He's the guy who built the village hall, actually. Anyway, and then comes along Mr. and Mrs. Trahair, and the Trahaires were Farley's Rusks. If you must have all heard of Farley's Rusks. And there was 3 brothers, and they were in Plymouth, and Farley's Rusks doing really well. And so one of the brothers settled here, Nicholas Trahair. He was a nice guy. He was here for quite some time. And then he moved to South Milton, I think, a house in South Milton. And that's when our host, Dr. John Gibson, came. And he's been here ever since. So what year was that, John?
1981.
1981, there you go. So, have I missed anything out?
Right from the Lockyers. In fact, the Lockyers were heavily involved with smuggling, which you wouldn't like to know about, but it's almost certainly true. And that feeds into some interesting information about the cellars, which I'll come to later. But if you take the people, the Stanley, Dr. Stanley, I was curious to know how a penurious doctor could actually afford to keep this place going, because it does require a lot of money with all the gardeners. And when Montefiores were here, there were 16 full-time gardeners.
Wow.
16 full-time gardeners.
Yes.
We've got 3 if we're lucky, plus myself and my son. I just take the Stanleys, because that's one little. So I wasn't sure how Stanley was going to come in. When I first came to Plymouth, I got to know some of the elderly retired doctors. And they say, "Well, John, where you live?" I said, "Well, I've been moved to Wembury." "Whereabouts Wembury? A place called Thorn." "Oh, we used to go there. We used to meet the three Graces." The 3 Graces? These were the 3 daughters that we heard about. Apparently they were life and soul of Plymouth, and all these they used to cause chaos throughout the social sort of of Plymouth. So I said, "That's very interesting. What happened to Mrs. Stanley?" "Oh, she hated the place. She stayed in Paris." So that's all I knew, apart from the fact that 1 or 2 interesting, Rudyard Kipling apparently was a frequent visitor here, and interesting things happened that we subsequently heard about. Anyway, between the 2 big outbreaks of COVID, there was a request for a garden visit, and Eva, my wife, who's sadly no longer with us, as you probably know, said, "Do you want to do this, John?" I said, "Well, how many are coming?" They said, 7. That just meets our threshold. "Yeah, I'll do it." Okay. So 3 cars drove up, and 7 people got out. They looked, what I would say, fit but elderly. And the chap got out of the car and said, "Nice to meet you, John. It's the first time I've been here for 65 years. I said, "Really? 65 years?" I said, "You wouldn't have known a Dr. Stanley, would you?" "Oh, yes, because my parents and he were best pals." I said, "So, look, when you're having your cream tea, could I just come and, tell me a bit about this guy? Because it's a complete sort of vacuum to me, this bit of my chronology." He said, "Yes." So I said, he was a very interesting guy, And the first thing he said to me, "Do you know, he built the largest private yacht that's ever been built in the United Kingdom?" I said, "You're having me on, aren't you?" "Bigger than Royal Yacht Britannia?" "Oh, much bigger." You're joking. No, he did. I said, well, where did he get all this from? He said, well, what happened was he qualified in medical school, didn't have any money to cope, he went out, decided to go over to Paris. And there he worked at the American Hospital in Paris, which some of you may know is a large philanthropic institution. They treat everybody, they do a lot of research. It's an amazing place. Most doctors have heard about it. And there he met and fell in love with a lady. And she happened to be the heiress of the man who founded the hospital in 1905. And they married, they had 3 daughters. She died in 1928 at the age of 32. And he was absolutely distraught. But what happened was he inherited everything. So just before the Great Depression, he inherited millions and millions of pounds, dollars, whatever. And this is what he did with it. He actually had a yacht that was entered in the America's Cup, and I think it came 3rd. So he was a very interesting guy. And I only learned about this through just perchance by some people coming visiting. We'll stop here. I just say a little bit more about the cellars, because that's what you come to see. It is, as Robert says, largely speculative, but there are hints that the cellars could be really quite old, or even very old. Now, why do I say that? Because there's a long history to how the Priory of Plympton got going. It was certainly mentioned in 904, and probably preceded that. So the Priory of Plympton goes back a long way. It was then known as a minster, and it became, because the regular canons and the secular canons, who were the people that inhabited the space, doing naughty things, they all took, in quotes, concubines. It was described in the contemporary literature. The Bishop of Exeter, a chap called Warrelbross, got fed up with this and disbanded it, and refounded the monastery in 1121 as an Augustinian priory. Now, it's pretty certain, and Robert will probably know a lot more about this, that a lot of it occupying the site of what is now Wembury House, the area, South Wembury as it was called. And almost certainly a lot of the stuff that kept the hospital was brought up by a river. And I've had antiquarians in Plymouth, I can't remember the names, many years ago coming in and saying that quay is seriously old. How they know that, I do not know. So the quay could have been contemporary with some of the earliest monastic goings on up there. Maybe the early 12th century, who knows. And then another member of your society, Ivor Hellberg, has been doing a lot of work on piracy and smuggling and all the rest of it. And there's a consistent mention of cellars that were available for storing contraband from around about 1650, maybe even earlier. And he says there's only one place on the River Yarn where this could have been, here. Okay. The other thing is, there are these little strands, and whether they add together, I don't know. But when you go into the cellars, you'll see what these Australian historians, the antiquarians that came down at the 200th anniversary that Robert referred to, crawling around everything that was associated with the lockers. They went into the cellars. The chap went into an offshoot of the cellars down there, says, my goodness, you've got Tudor beehive cellars here. Tudor beehive cellars, what are they? He said, what you've got here. Now, if that is true, and they really are Tudor, the cellars that they've been built off are clearly older than that. So there are hints that the cellars may be seriously old. And you'll see that the foundations are, well, you have a look, there must be at least 10 feet, if not more, thick. And whether, there was some fortified building there guarding the quay, because as you see, you can see from here, if you go on the river, right to the other, one end of the river and to the other. So it was strategically placed. Right, we said enough. Ask me any questions. There's a lot more about Arkwright. I could spend literally 2 hours telling you about Arkwright and what he did to this garden. And in the time of the Montefiores, before the outbreak of the Second World War, this was described as having the richest plant collection in Devon. And it may still have, because Roy Lancaster, who has been described as the greatest plantsman in the world when he gave a lecture in Plymouth some years ago, he said we thought we had 16 champion trees here, which is quite a lot for a garden which, we won't say how big it is, but it's quite big. He said you've got far more than that. In other words, there are a lot of trees here which are truly very almost unique. The one in the corner there behind you There's not another one like it probably in the whole wide world, and I could spend minutes telling you about that if you're interested. It's an Abies pendula alba. It comes from the eastern Carpathians or the western parts of Romania. It normally creeps over the ground. Very few specimens have grown that high, but they look like regular pines. So that's a complete freak. And Martin Hicks, who's the head of Kew, has tried to propagate it unsuccessfully. But there are a lot of trees like that, if you're botanically inclined. Right.
These foundations, I think, speak for themselves. They're absolutely massive. They go from here right the way through to the other side.
So if there was smuggling, how would they have to bring it up over? I mean, it's quite a
No.
above the,
Well, down on the quay,
yeah.
there's a track from the quay that comes straight up here.
Oh right. Yes.
Yeah, and interestingly, just not about along that track from the quay itself, there's some steps for mounting a horse, and nobody would ever knew what it was for. And Ivor, who's been doing some work on this, Ivor Heldberg, you may know, said that horses with panniers would have come up there.
Yeah.
So that's almost certainly what it was. If we go through here, sorry about all the mess, but I'm afraid you have to put. Yeah. There's something else interesting in this cellar here, actually. This I think is quite interesting, because the sun lodger, which is up above here, which is where you'll have your tea, there are some old paintings which clearly show that was there, probably from the mid-1800s, okay?
Yeah.
Now this goes underneath it, so this would have been a skylight for probably people living down here.
Yes.
And these
Windows.
are old windows, and some of the original glass is there, probably from the 18th century, mid-18th century, and which fits with the fact that in the cloakroom up on the first floor, we found, as usually used as a trestle here, a huge door, solid mahogany door, which someone said is clearly from about the early 1700s. We've tried to mount it in front of a cupboard. It looks quite incongruous. But that fits with what was going on down here probably. So this quotes Locker's cottage. What it was, we don't know. So this is another... Yeah, I mean, you old panelling of some sort. So there would have... you can come down here. There are two stairs which don't lead anywhere. This one leads up into a cupboard, which is now blocked off, which we don't know where that is. This one's more interesting because you can go down here. It would lead up, it's all been blocked off, to an area up here, which is actually probably a blocked off small room, which is behind a walk-in safe. And Eva my wife would never allow us to open it, but there is something funny about these stairs. They go up into a mystery room. We wondered whether Arkwright might be buried there, but interred there. But this is where he went in and said, you see? So a beehive cellar.
Oh right.
So I don't know nothing about it. That's what he said. And you can see this would have been built off the main cellars.
Yeah.
They couldn't have possibly have come after this. So that puts those cellars there certainly, before 1650. No, sorry, before 1500 probably.
Good Lord.
And that was stored in there, all of it I've taken out because with the heating system, it's just too warm. It's the cooler cellar here, so that's what we do. Right. Not.
before, did they?
Yes.
Does that mean...
Well, we've had a lovely afternoon here at Thorn, and the sun has come out.
It's
So-
just as we're going, yes. It's nice, isn't it?
So I hope you've all had a chance to see the gardens and see the very interesting cellars. And I'd like, you can if you, carry on, yeah. And I'd just like to thank John most sincerely for letting us come down and have a look around and hear all the stories and see those marvellous cellars. So if you'd all like to join with me in the usual way, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you.